This is Uncommonly Remarkable. We have surprisingly casual discussions about the lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. Think of this podcast as an opportunity to learn something new and to pick up on an entrepreneurial tip or two through open conversation. I'm Artis Beatty. I'm a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. Today's guest is Ben Swift. He's the founder of Unified Imaging, a company quietly revolutionizing the way doctors manage, share, and learn from patient data. What started as a scrappy solution in a retina clinic has grown into a platform aggregating millions of patient records. It's reshaping AI in healthcare and even reimagining how a patient's data could one day fund their own care. In this conversation, we talk about building through uncertainty, the messy middle of healthcare innovation, and what it really takes to turn a single idea into a global tech solution. Whether you're into health tech, startups, or the future of AI in medicine, this one's got something for you. Ladies, gentlemen, all you remarkable people, please welcome Ben Swift to the show. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so excited to have you on the show, Ben.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I tell you what, I know we've worked together in a variety of ways over a very long time. And it has been fascinating to watch you and your company as you've grown and changed and all of the technology that you've really brought to the world. And so when I started thinking about, man, who should I talk to next? You're really high on that list. And so I'm really glad timing worked out to let you be able to come by and us sit down together today.
No, thank you so much. I mean, we Unified and me personally, we owe you a ton. I think there have been several milestones throughout our journey where if you weren't involved and kind of helping us along, then we wouldn't be here today. So I owe you quite a bit and really, really excited to talk to you.
Well, let's jump in and really talk about Unify, because for the majority of people, we'll set the stage.
Yes.
So, when you go and see a doctor, there's obviously a lot of things that happen within that examination. There's, if you're seeing your primary care physician, there's a physical, there's blood work, there's all these things, and they have to be collected and cataloged and really made part of your eternal record. Yep. There are also other tests, though, that are outside of that realm that involve imaging. And in the world of physicians, that could be x-rays or CTs or MRIs. In the world of optometrists and ophthalmologists, those are often photos or fields or other types of testing that happen in the office. And the trouble is those things all exist on their individual instruments. And while they're physically in the office with you, getting them into a place where you can actually do cross comparisons just is not easy. And I'm saying all this because you and your company thought about that a long time ago and really started to think about how do we solve that problem. So tell us a little bit about Unify.
Yeah, so that's a great introduction. Thanks for setting it up. Yeah, I mean, Unified really exists to do exactly what you're saying. So I actually started out working in a retina practice. So I was a tech and a scribe and the photographer, the person taking all the photos and everything. And especially in retina, you're dealing with tons of data from all these different devices. And one of our jobs as scribes was to make sure we take all the different photos for the doctor and then bring them into the room. And it was our job to make sure, hey, are all the programs pulled up? Does everything look exactly the way the doctors want it? Get the record all filled out, all that good stuff. And pulling up all those different programs was just such a pain in the butt. And so that really was like, there's got to be some better way to actually make this happen. And that's really what Unified does. So Unified is this program that can sit in your office and pull all the data, all the images from all your devices, and then put it into one place so the doctors can view all that data, view it over time, view it from any sort of device, and then also share that data. Because the other big thing is you might have all the data aggregated in one place and it might be accessible to you, but when you need to share that patient with another provider or you need to share the data with the patient themselves, you want them to have the actual access to it. We were working in the retina clinic, a lot of times people would send us, patients for injections and they'd send us the OCTs, but the OCTs were all black and just have to redo the test anyways. And so one of the really big things with Unified is once your data's there, you can then share it, the actual patient chart, with any other doctor, and that doctor can jump in, see all the images. They can share their images as well. So, not having to make the patient do a whole bunch of extra tests. You actually have one record that everybody can work off of.
Which sounds pretty amazing. So let's go back a step and let's talk about what existed or when you started Unified. When was that?
We started Unified in 2014. It's been 10 years, I think, now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So 2014, technology is zooming, and so there's a lot more. There's a lot more stuff today than 2014. But what's important about 2014 is that you were using 2014 technology to kind of aggregate 20, I guess 2002, 2003 type devices, right?
Yeah. And so, it might be important to kind of go back even to the very, start.
Yeah, let's do that.
So, I was working in the retina clinic and, really was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. My whole life, I kind of thought I was going to become a doctor. That was my main motivation. The main thing I thought I was going to be, throughout a couple different life events that ended up not happening. And I wasn't really sure what I was going to actually be able to do, like how I can contribute to this field. And, while I was working at Retina Associates, I ended up getting to meet the VP of sales for Zeiss. He kind of saw what I was doing. And for a little while, I spent some time interviewing at a bunch of different medical device companies. I was actually in my final interview with Zeiss, and I was at Vision Expo, or is it Vision Expo West or AAO? I can't remember now, but ran into the guys at Modernizing Medicine. And it was the first time I saw like a piece of software where people were able to like code it. Like I made like a little comment like, oh, I really wish that you could move this one dial like differently. And they were like, oh, that's interesting. And then they just disappeared in like a little back room for like 5 minutes. They came back to like, hey, what do you think? And they like literally had it working. And it was the first time I realized like, oh, wait, like, so this software that we're using every day, you can just change it. You can just do whatever you want. And so I literally told Zeiss, no, I'm not interested. I think I want to go into software. And I just started applying to Modernizing Medicine over and over and over again. They never hired me. I didn't know how to program, so I wasn't a good fit. And so I kind of, really kind of had this idea where I was like, oh, I want to build software that can help fix these things that I'm seeing. I can't join a company that I want to work for. What do I do? And so I kind of started tinkering around with software in the clinic. And Bob at the time had left Zeiss and reached out to me and was like, hey, I'm starting this new company. It's called Eye Care Alliance. Why don't you just come into our office and just see, what we're doing? And so I went in to meet with him for lunch, ended up staying the whole rest of the day. It was really, it was the first time I had seen this. He was basically taking all of the equipment that we were using throughout the day in clinic and, buying them from, practices and then refurbing them and then selling them. And again, just something I didn't know was even possible at all. And his deal to me was, it's like, look, if you come in and you start helping me with this, learn all the devices, help me sell this equipment, help me service this equipment, help me train on it, any other side projects you want to do, like I'll help fund kind of in the background. And that was a really interesting proposition for me. So I was like, yeah, sure, let's do this. And so I spent, we probably spent about a year and a half just, working on Eye Care Alliance, building that up and, flipping a bunch of different equipment, learning all the different systems. While we were there, one of the big problems that we started running into was, in eye care, there's the visual field machine, which is every eye doctor has a visual field machine. It's a pretty standard piece of equipment. For a long time, as long as I've been in the industry, the Zeiss visual field has been kind of like the gold standard. We were kind of right at the intersection of when the non-networked version was kind of coming out of being pulled out of practice and the network version was going into practices. So the business opportunity was, hey, if we can take these old visual field machines that can't connect to a network and actually give them a way to connect to the network and, kind of revitalize them, then they're just as good as the network version that Zeiss is selling for a ton of money. So we can sell them at a discount and it's a win for everyone.
Except for maybe Zeiss.
Because I don't know if Zeiss was super happy about it. But, what are you going to do?
That's right. But I mean, it's really interesting to think about though, right? Because you, up until this point, you've got the availability of an instrument and people were used to saving things on some sort of removable disk.
Yeah.
So and then the big move came when there was some permanent disk that was inside the
Yeah.
instrument. But really, you ended up printing all of these pieces of paper that had analysis points on the paper, and you would use that to go into a chart, which you may at that point have been doing an electronic medical
Yep.
record, which meant scanning that back into
Exactly.
so it could be part of the chart for you to be able to catalog over time.
Yep.
And so the purpose of the networking was really to allow for those instruments to display the printed report in some other manner so people could actually make some comparisons and
Yep.
be able to do that without the paper.
Yep.
So this idea of yours kind of takes that and stands it on its end and says, hey, why don't we do that then for the older instruments
Yep.
too? And everybody can have the best of both worlds, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, and it's not just, I think an important point is it's not just about providing like cheaper instruments for doctors, right? Like there's a place for the best and latest, medical devices out there. There's also a huge market for these devices outside of the US as well. So especially like I think there's kind of like a nice trickle down effect in the US where you have your top tier doctors that are buying the really, really nice equipment, and then it's kind of filtering out over time to maybe your second tier doctors, and then at some point that's filtering out across the world and going to different humanitarian organizations and things like that. So I think it's important to make sure that even if a piece of medical equipment is old, you're still making sure that you are making sure it works perfectly.
That's right.
But then also it's able to actually interact still in this world. Like just because it's old and it can't network doesn't mean you can throw it out. It's still a good device.
That's exactly right. I mean, you're constantly trying to make sure you're staying at the standard of care, right?
Yes.
And I had a guest early on in the podcast who works for a company who, to your point, takes devices that are no longer providing the standard of care for
Yep.
humans and converts them to veterinary devices that are
that's
used
awesome.
for animals around the country, around the
Yep.
world, right? And so that you're right, like there has to be some way of being able to recycle some of this technology.
Yep.
And the lifespan of technology is not forever. We're
No.
always finding new things, right? But some of these devices have a very, very, very long life, and being able to continue to have that life is important.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's what we were doing. We're just trying to save doctors money, revitalize some old machines. Throughout all of that, we found this program called Red Titan, which was not something that we designed at all, but it was basically this little print capture device that you could plug into the parallel port of a visual field machine.
Oh, wow.
You could digitize that printout. And if anybody is not an eye care,
Yeah.
the old visual field machines, literally, they were thermal paper printouts. So like, I mean, just really old rolls of paper.
Yeah.
You could literally plug into that and then have that stream digitized, and then you could bring it anywhere. But it was kind of a just difficult process to set up. Like, you had to plug it in, get all the right drivers, just make sure everything was connected. Things were always coming out. So for a couple months, we were selling visual fields with this Red Titan. We're like, oh, this is an interesting solution. But when I was looking at it, I was like, man, I feel like with the way things are moving right now, there's got to be a way to do this wirelessly. Like there has to be some way to just make this a lot sexier for, doctors, make the whole experience just a little bit better. And
Sure.
so I credit this to Bob. Again, like up until this time, I was like, oh, I can tinker with software, but hardware was not something I thought, you could really tinker with or touch. And I just flippantly said to Bob, like, hey, like, I really feel like there's got to be some way to turn this digital stream into a Bluetooth stream and just send it out to a computer. And, Bob, again, the very first person that really like showed me this, he's like, oh, you have an idea? Like there's people in this world that can make that idea happen. And that was a really fun moment for me. Like he literally like, I just had this like, oh, like this could be Bluetooth. And I didn't think that was a real thing. It was like, oh, this would be neat. He's like, oh, well, there's a bunch of universities around. I bet there's somebody who's doing Bluetooth research. Like, let's go find out like who's involved in this field. And so, literally it took like 2 weeks. We just kind of searched around, found a bunch of different researchers, ended up finding a guy named Tim Toombs who was doing research with attaching anodes to mice brains and then sending that data out over Bluetooth to like other devices. And so, read his paper and was like, hey, this is exactly what we need to do, but for a medical device. If he can do it on these little mice, then he should be able to do it for our stuff. And so, yeah, we got to meet with him, kind of brought him in, showed him what we were doing. And worked with them for about a year to develop this thing we call the Link, which is essentially this little Bluetooth device. Goes into the parallel ports of a visual field machine or any sort of medical device that
Hmm.
you can't digitize. And when you press print, it just sends the print spool to that little device, and then it sends it out to some sort of Bluetooth connected device somewhere. So that kind of gave us the very first, iteration of like the integration part of Unified, where it was like, okay, now you can have this visual field. You're just going to press print, and then you have a little tablet, you have a computer somewhere. The image is just going to pop up. It's going to feel really magical. And that was kind of our very first, that was still in the iCare Alliance days, but that was really like, okay, now we have a way to digitize data. What do we actually do with it? And then, that's where, really Unified really started to take off, because I had this background idea for a long time of a unified system. Like, hey, if we can put all this data into one place, not only would it just be easier from a tech perspective, but I think one of the things that really struck me when I started working in ophthalmology. So when I was like, coming up and learning everything, all my time was spent basically working for orthopedic doctors. And that's really the type of medicine that I thought I would deal with, work with a bunch of athletes and do the really cool stuff.
Well, I would imagine you would be kind of drawn to that part of medicine because
Yes.
you were a swimmer.
I was a swimmer. Yeah. Yeah. So dealing with sports and all of that was very much kind of more of the way that I was thinking about the world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you got to tell us now about this swimming with Michael Phelps deal because
Oh yeah, that's a funny story. So there's a bunch of children out there that have my autograph and Michael Phelps right next to each other on some U.S. Open T-shirts. I'm very sorry. Probably brought down the value of those
absolutely
shirts.
fantastic.
Yeah, I was a swimmer all through high school and part of college. And when I was 16, I swam in the U.S. Open. It was actually one of the meets that was really fun. Michael Phelps beat Tom Malchow during that meet, which was just great. It was like the first time we beat him in the 400 IM. It was like this really big deal. I got to swim against him in a couple events, got crushed, obviously, but we were in the locker room later on, getting changed together. And so we just ended up walking out of the locker room together. And there's, of course, just like a massive, a huge amount of like children there, just throwing T-shirts at him, trying to get them to sign them. And they, just assumed I was probably also somebody worth getting an autograph from. So, and he was really cool about it. He just kind of looked over and was like, hey, isn't this fun? I'm like, yeah, it's kind of cool.
And but I could imagine you're swimming with Michael Phelps. You're a swimming superstar. But like really, that's kind of what guided your thinking about I'm going to be in medicine, but I'm going to be in this part of medicine. How did you stumble into ophthalmology from that?
Yeah, well, so I'd always thought I was going to be a doctor, and then kind of had some life events that happened that kind of took me off course, and kind of realized, hey, this is not the path that I'm going to be able to take. And my dad was actually a practice administrator for North Carolina Retina Associates, and it was just like, hey, was working a whole bunch of different jobs. I was working in a lab, in a restaurant, in a bar, like just doing all these different things. And he was like, hey, why don't you come out, talk to Dr. Casey, see what his thoughts are. And so had lunch with Dr. Casey, and he was like, hey, you really are just spinning your wheels out there. You're not really doing much out there. I was still at U of I at the time, and just trying to figure out what I was going to do. And he was like, we want to start a clinical trial program here. Why don't you come in and just kind of learn the ropes, learn how to tech, learn how to do all these different things. And, as we start clinical trials, maybe you can get into that. Maybe you'll have some ideas, and, maybe med school can happen at some point down the road. And that's really kind of what got me into eye care. And even at the time when I first started, I was still just like, okay, great, eyes. Like, this is so, like, I remember the first time I got to sit down with Dr. Madvari, and he was showing me like, because the first thing was, hey, you're going to scribe, so you need to learn how to do these drawings. So like, as I'm saying all these things to the patient, you need to be like recording all this stuff down. Here's all the colors that we like to, color code things in.
Because when you're doing the physical drawings, the colors made a big difference.
Yeah, the old school. Yeah, literally, you had to know like what color you wanted to mark, the picture of the eye with, to denote all the different pathologies or whatever. And I just remember we're sitting down for like hours going over all this stuff and just thinking like, man, this is so nerdy. Like, I just want to like rip open a knee and like I'll put it back together or something. Right. But it really was the first time I got to do an OCT on somebody and actually see like, for people that are listening that don't know, when you do an OCT, you're basically doing a cross section of the eye. So it's, imagine your eye's like this basketball. If you were to cut it in half and turn it on its side, you could literally look inside of it. And that first time realizing like, oh, this is brain tissue that we're looking at. All these different layers here. These are all like different receptor layers. Like there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on here.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of this light bulb moment where it was like, oh, like everything else that's happening within your body, it's all happening first inside of your eyes. And I kind of just had this like idea that just kind of like flooded me where it was like, oh no, like there's stuff going on here inside the eye today that we just don't have the technology and the knowledge to pull out, but like there's something really, really cool here. And I think that just kind of got me really into ophthalmology, and then I just became even more into it over time.
And you make a really good point, because we talk about fields which for people who are not ophthalmology nerds, they don't realize that we're talking about a visual field, the area that the eye can see in front of the eye without having the eye move. And recording what those measurements are very important for all types of pathology. And so that's why fields are important. Thinking about drawing in color before we had retinal photos as a normal part of practice, even for ophthalmology, when you looked at a retina, you had to make a sketch of what you saw, and the color helped you understand if there were pathology versus normal, and you would vary the colors for that. So for everybody listening, always have a retinal photo when you go and have an eye exam, because you don't want your doctor having to break out the crayons and try to figure out what did they actually see in there, right?
Exactly.
And then with OCTs, the way you describe it is absolutely amazing, right? Because having the eye be an out pocket of brain tissue is one of those things that, like, when you really start to think about that.
And I feel like most people don't think about that. Like as a layperson, I didn't really understand. Oh, this film in the back of my eye, like that's my brain.
Yeah,
like
that's crazy, right?
It's really crazy.
And with OCTs, I love the way you describe it, and being able to see this cross section. I often will tell people who've never seen an OCT that it's like seeing a Doppler radar.
Yeah.
And that, when you see a Doppler radar, there's this series of colors that you see that represent reflectivity. Yeah. And so rain looks a way, and clouds look different than if it's raining really hard or if it's snowing. And this OCT allows us to look at the retina that way. And we should be able to tell from the way the image forms whether or not these things are normal. And it's just really, really cool to have all these devices. But to our whole point, they all were separate devices with no way of actually getting this information to come together to help you really look at and determine what you wanted to do next.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that was really, again, I mean, even just seeing that, like every single day you're meeting all these awesome patients. Again, the things when you're a retina tech that you think are awesome are actually horrible for the patient. So it's a weird thing to break out of, but there's just so many just interesting things that you get to see every single day. And one of the things that just was always sticking out to me was, okay, like, and even with the drawing piece, right? It's like we would take digital photos, but because the digital photo was then just there sitting on the Zeiss machine, it wasn't even in the room yet. You would have to do that so that the doctor could quickly look back at like his past notes and see what was going on. So at that time, it was more like, okay, I think that there's a bunch of interesting data here, and I think we're missing things because, first of all, on the follow-up visits, doctors are just looking at drawings. Like, let's actually, like, what if we could actually just look back at like all the past data in the exam room? Like, that would be really nice. And then what if we could actually have our OCTs next to our fundus photos, next to our visual fields? Like, how many more things can we start uncovering the more we can put this together? But then I think even at that time, what was more exciting to me was, this was probably 2008 to 2012-ish, I want to say. So it was like right when kind of like the whole big data craze was really starting to pick up. And it was just, you're looking at all of that and you're just like, wow, there's literally just like data points everywhere. And they're just being thrown away. This. And we were doing clinical trials where the clinical trial process it's hard. I mean, just to find the patients that qualify for the clinical trials is very, very difficult. And then once you get the patients in, all the data you have to record for them is very time consuming, very difficult. And again, like every study we were doing, it was just, you see all the data you're tracking, and you're like, man, like all this data is literally just already available. It just isn't in a format or in a way where people can take advantage of it. So we're having to do all these like crazy, expensive, long, boring processes to make them work. So it was really this, at that time, I knew I wanted to have a way to bring everything together. I knew that there was going to be a lot of opportunity there. I just didn't know how to actually make that happen. And even with Bob, Bob came from Zeiss, and Zeiss is a really good image management product, and Bob was one of the main people who helped build that. And so one of the big refrains early on in the iCare Alliance days was, we're not building another forum. Like we're not building an image management system. We're not doing a PAX. and I was like, okay, that's fine. We'll just keep building, this link thing. But hey, like now that we have these images, we need to build some software for it. Okay, well, it's not a PAX. It's just a way to accept, So I kind of, was able to kind of work it out where we kind of slowly kind of built up this, image management software. And before Bob knew it, we had an image management company. So
that's incredible. That's incredible.
So it worked out. And then, we essentially, we built the company up. At that time, we were basically, doing the thing with the links. So we were converting all the print data from the visual fields. We were also doing a lot of camera conversions. So, there's all these old fundus cameras out there that are literally like a Canon camera with film on the back of it. And that's how you used to take pictures. You'd take that and you develop the film, and it was pretty brutal. So we kind of started a whole business around replacing those analog camera backs with digital cameras. And that was really the bread and butter of Unified, 1.0, was those camera replacements, and then kind of had Unified as our software kind of in the middle of it.
Sorry. Well, if you did a camera replacement, now this has just got me thinking. If you did a camera replacement, though, what was the capture software for to run the digital? Was it so Unified was running the
that was my other little way to start because I was like, okay, well, we have visual fields coming in. Well, now we need software for this camera. Well, it's the same software. Look,
I see.
Slowly
so
started kind of
it all in,
bringing more stuff together. Yeah,
and so so we're in the mid 2010s, right? 14, 15. Yep. You're developing things. Technology is continuing to change. We're getting fewer and fewer of, we'll call them legacy or vintage devices, and many more devices that were designed from the start to be networked. So I would imagine then that opened the path more to think about the software itself, because there were a lot of developments within the software that were not part of the initial design, but later became important so that you could actually analyze images that were being captured or stored, right?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's really kind of the whole, thesis behind Unified really is all the things that we really want to do, like the long-term stuff I really want to do, the technology isn't necessarily there yet. But if we build this platform, if we start building all these things together over time, the technology does become available. And so, for us, and I kind of talk about Unified as, Unified 1.0 and Unified 2.0. We did, as we were growing the first business, we really thought, the idea in our head at the time was, okay, we have this imaging piece. We can integrate with all of these imaging devices. But to your point, it's what other data can you now associate with the images that make it more valuable for the doctors? And the natural thing there was, you work with the EHR companies. And so, really, the first round of Unified was us really trying to find good EHR partners so that we could build Unified into the EHR and collect more of that data. Through that process, we ended up meeting the guys at Rev 360, and that became many conversations that went very late into the night, and throughout all those conversations, it kind of went from a, hey, we should integrate with you guys, to we want to acquire you guys, and so that was a very interesting moment for us at the time. Bob was, he was kind of ready to move on. So it made a lot of sense. And so we sold the company to Rev 360. And that, really opened up it was the first time I ever had any money. So I was making like 30 grand a year, just like trying to.
But you were
like
learning great things.
I was learning a ton. I mean, it was invaluable experience. And so really joining Rev was the first time I got to have a little bit of freedom, a little bit more like, what else can I, what else can we do?
What's
here?
On the menu, right?
Yeah.
So then talk to me a little bit about what you learned in not just going to Rev, but if you were to look back and think about um, how you started, the purpose for Unified initially, what have you learned during the course of time that you look at and say, man, I wish I would have known that when I started because it would have made a difference in where we are today?
That's a good that's a good question, because a lot of things have happened even since the Rev sale. You know, it's interesting. So I would say the one piece of feedback that I would give anybody, if I could go back and tell my younger self, there's two things to say here. So I would say the one thing that I learned was there's nuance to every piece of advice that you get.
Mm.
There are so many times I got into trouble where, you would hear, a little like startup rule or a little thing like, especially that always be hiring rule, like, hey, if you see good talent, you hire them. Yeah, there's nuance to that maxim though, right? It's like if you're venture funded and you have a huge amount of money sitting behind you, gobble up as many great employees as you can. If you don't have that, be a little bit more considerate about who you're bringing. Sometimes it might be the right person, but not the right time, and that does exist. But that was one of the
And I don't want you to
no,
lose your
yeah,
second one, but I think that's really, really important.
fair.
Because it is, you hear that all the time, and you don't want to turn down great talent if you come across the great talent, but you have to be responsible about it. So either you have to simultaneously evaluate your current talent and make determinations on whether or not this is an addition, a replacement, or a supplement to that talent, right? Or you have to really figure out where am I planning then to reduce my spend to stay
Yep.
afloat in order to have this talent on the team long enough for the talent to produce whatever they're going to produce to get you to the next step. And I think you're exactly right. That is often overlooked in that maxim.
Yep. Yeah.
Because the maxim normally it just expects that there's unlimited funds, and maybe it should start that way. Given unlimited funds,
Yes. Yes.
always be hiring.
Yeah. Yeah. That was kind of my like little like internal monologue, was like, yeah, okay, like every little piece of advice you get, you have to think of what's the context that they like formed that thought process to that advice in, because it might not be the
Yeah.
same as your situation. But I think more importantly past that, and this is actually something I would say I'm just starting to get comfortable with. I'm 40 years old now, so I feel like I'm like, maybe halfway, maybe a little bit less, through my life. And I will say one of the bigger things I've been thinking a lot about more recently is, if as long as you keep going, as long as you don't give up, as long as you just keep plodding along, like keep trying to like pursue your purpose, everything really does fall into place. So it's almost like, to say, because a lot of things where it's like, oh, I wouldn't do that, I wouldn't do that. It's like, well, but I learned, X from this, I learned Y from that, and now I'm a different person today because of that. And everything kind of snowballs and builds on itself to where it's almost like, don't take anybody's advice ever. Just go see what happens. And if you're what you're meant to do, if you keep on pursuing it, it will just happen. Like the universe has a way of just kind of pushing you in the way that, where it needs somebody to slot, it will find a way to get you there. Is where I'm kind of landing these days.
I think that is great advice, because you don't know what you don't know until way later,
Yeah.
right? But you always have to take chances based on what you feel is the right decision at that time. And sometimes you're spot on. It's the best decision you could have possibly make. And sometimes you're not, but you don't really know that in the moment, right? And so the reason I ask you that question is because I feel like you've positioned yourself to be able to leverage technology in a way that not everyone who started a technology business in the early 2010s was able to do. And specifically thinking about the data aggregation and AI, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so can you talk a little bit about how you see AI in today's world with Unified?
Yeah. So now we're on the second iteration of Unified. So I actually ended up buying back Unified from Rev at the start of 2020. And really the idea there was, hey, there's a whole lot of things that we left uncovered that we still want to pursue. And kind of to what you were saying earlier, really the market was changing to where now we weren't, one of the really big pain points of Unified 1.0 was, when you're selling camera upgrades and little pieces of equipment that you have to like bolt onto other equipment, supporting hardware is hard. It's not fun. Even the best hardware ever,
Hmm.
like it breaks
Right.
down. There's problems with it. There's all these different processes you have to follow to handle hardware. And so I knew if we were going to be in the hardware game, I definitely did not want to keep doing unified. But looking across the landscape, it was like, wait, there's now if you go into a doctor's office, every single device will at least be able to export out some digital format of what they're viewing. More often than not, they're able to export out DICOM files, which is just if there's any radiologists listening, they're like, why is that good for you? But like for eye care, it took us 20 years longer than anybody else to move into the DICOM world. And so now that most manufacturers support DICOM, it's like, oh, wait, the hard part of what we were doing at Unified before is no longer hard. That's
Yeah.
the easy part. Now we just get to focus on what do we get to do with all this really cool data. And that's really the whole story of Unified 2.0. So, what we've done is we were the first, fully cloud-based image management system in eye care. So we're aggregating all this data up into the cloud. We have millions and millions of patients and hundreds of millions of patient images. And what that lets us do is basically create some of our own AI tools. But it also really lets us help doctors create their own AI tools. So one of my really big things with Unified is I want the platform to be so seamless and so easy for doctors to interact with their data in that they can just become really geeky. like I want doctors to
I
like
love
really
that.
just obsess about what's happening with their patients. And I think right now there's just too much friction in the pipeline to where doctors can't really spend the time to do that. And I feel like now we're at this point where we're finally getting to a point with technology that we can start giving doctors that experience. We can start making them just like really dig into their patients, really dig into all their data across, all their patient base.
That's really interesting for me because one of the things that I am personally passionate about with AI is going beyond the identification. So for people
Yes.
who are listening, in a lot of the AI that's currently available for eye care, it is really designed around identification. So we do things like classify patients from a diabetic retinopathy perspective. So that means a patient who has diabetes or potentially has diabetes may have signs of the disease in the retina, and and the current AI technology is really good at identifying that looks like it might be diabetic retinopathy.
Exactly.
That's valuable. It's less valuable for optometrists and ophthalmologists who see diabetic retinopathy on a regular basis because
Yes.
the AI is not going to be able to identify that it is diabetic retinopathy much more efficiently than the doctor is when they see some sort of image, right?
Yes.
But beyond that, and I think this is where you were going, being able to categorize the retinopathy in a repeatable and dependable way is something that AI really could contribute, right? Because I may see a patient and say that it's stage two, and you may see that same patient and say, it's maybe stage one, maybe it's a two.
Yeah.
And then some other
Yeah.
doctor might say, no, 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 for sure that's three,
Yep.
right? And so, but there are rules that determine which stage it actually is. And
Yep.
sometimes in the in between, it's kind of hard to tell where it
Yeah.
goes. And so having AI be able to help categorize things, in my opinion, would be a huge leap forward for a use case in that part of the world. And so that comes down to having the amount of data that you need and having people to accurately, I guess, help teach AI what to
Yeah.
look for,
Yeah. Yep.
becomes really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I think I kind of break AI down into a couple different like segments that it actually helps doctors. I think identifying what you're talking about is kind of the base layer, right? Like you teach a computer how to tell what this thing is. Great. Like that's step one. But then once you have that base layer identified, what can you actually start to do? Now that you can identify all these things really quickly, what can you do on top of that? And I think that's really where stuff starts to get a lot more interesting on our
Yeah.
side. So it's, even like in terms of um, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense in terms of just kind of normalizing out the way the doctors are actually observing what's going on. But also, I think from a, if you, so I think just identifying things, that's step one.
Yep.
But then actually making it actionable, that's step two. So, there's one where it's like, okay, cool. Like even in Unified today, this is something that we're still needing to do a better job in. This is what we're building to. So in Unified, we can automatically identify the level of diabetic retinopathy for the patient. You as the doctor, as you're seeing patients, you can actually be adding your own tags, and we can actually turn all your tags into its own AI model so that you're never having to actually go in and say what you think is going on. You can just click a button and say, I agree. We're kind of trying to make all of that a lot faster. But really the next step is when you as a doctor, when you jump into your hub for the day, can we show you what's the most important thing to focus on? Because you only have a limit at a time like throughout the day. And I think that's, there's multiple levels to that. So it's just like from the triage perspective, and we do this now with FQHCs where we can basically show them, hey, based on all the patients that have been seen this week across all your different primary care centers, here's an order list of like who the people are that you should actually see. Because here's the people that we think have diabetes. Here's the people that we don't think have it. And then the doctor can kind of, if they only have 5 minutes to look at, 3 patients and they have a list of 30, here's your 3 that you should look at first. And then these rest can wait a little bit later. Or we can pass them off to another doctor. So I think there's that triage component. But then I think there's also, and the more interesting component for me is, identifying population level trends within your clinic. So, like when I was really lucky when I started working in retina, it was right when Avastin started coming out. And so again, like for people that aren't familiar with this world, before when you had macular degeneration, if you had wet macular degeneration, it was like the worst thing ever. And it was horrible as a tech because you would see somebody come in, it's an old person complaining that they can't really see, and then you do an OCT and you can see a little bit of swelling. You do an FA, you can definitely tell it's leaking, and it's just like you just know, like, okay, sorry, we're just going to tell you to come back every 6 months and show you how much more vision you've lost. And then all of a sudden these new drugs came out, and it was the coolest thing in the world because you went from bringing these patients back every 6 months and just being like, I'm so sorry, to, hey, we can stick a needle in your eye. You're not even going to feel it. You're not even going to know what's happening. And within a couple of weeks, like that swelling is going to dry up. And just to be a part of that in general was really, really fun. But throughout that process, Avastin was first, and then Lucentis came out, and then Eylea came out. We had all these different options that we could use. What we started seeing in clinic was, some patients responded just fine to Avastin. Some people responded not that well to Avastin, but the minute you gave them Lucentis, it was like totally cleared up. Some people, you could try all of them, but then like Eylea would work. And there's a cost differential to all of these medicines as well. So Avastin is really, really cheap. You obviously want to give that to everybody. Lucentis is really expensive. Eylea is even more expensive. So you want to be careful with how you're, dispersing out these medicines, but you also want to make sure that you're giving them like the right medicine. And we were trying to track this constantly, just trying to figure out, like, we had all these spreadsheets, all these notepads, just trying to figure out like, okay, like what are the things that are going on inside of these patients that make them respond differently to these drugs? Like, is it just the pathological presentation? Like, is it just the stuff that we're seeing, clinically, or is it because they're a smoker or because they have a history of this or whatever? That project never really went anywhere because we were trying to track it in so many different ways. And that's really where I think the really, really fun part about AI comes into me, where it's like, okay, if you have all this data in one place, all those questions that we're asking, that's not a data aggregation problem anymore. That's literally just can you ask the right question and get the data back, and then analyze it from there.
That's amazing. I mean, and that's one of the things that we talk about in our clinics all the time, right? We've got a volume of data, and we've got a volume of patients, and those patients are part of what could be best practices. So if you are able to not only know who is this patient in all the demographic forms, but what happened to this patient? Like, what did we do? And that could include what medications did we prescribe? What was the frequency of the follow-up visits? What testing did we do? Then how have they progressed, or what did they look like over time, to develop a best practice based on a patient profile? That's a powerful unlock, because then you can meet a patient who falls into this category and already have a plan for how you're going to treat them, and then watch to make sure they turn out like other patients.
Are they actually following the trend line that everybody else is following?
Right.
So I think right now, research it's very slow. It takes a long time to aggregate even retrospective studies. And, what if we could actually have a system where retrospective studies were being done in real time in everybody's clinics. And then we were able to, like, I think a concept that I think about a lot is like, how cool would it be if, like, you as Dr. Vitti, you see something kind of cool in your clinics? Like, hey, I've noticed, like, patients that use this drop end up having this, outcome, or whatever.
Yeah.
It'd be really cool to me if you could actually see if that's like a true hypothesis across all of your patient base. But then you could also, like, ping your colleague at another practice and say, hey, is this true over there too? And is this true over here? And actually see, like, how things change across different doctors, different geographies, different, like, areas. I think that could be really powerful over time, especially, like, as we get into, like, an age of, there's new viruses, new things that pop up all the time. Like, as we're trying to track these things in mass, I think having a system where you're not reliant on these really long timelines of trying to aggregate a bunch of people, do the study, and then publish the results. Can we get to more of this, like, process of having, like, a stream of results being analyzed in real time and kind of getting those standards kind of updated?
Absolutely,
Live.
because it takes it from being anecdotal to being really fact driven.
Yep.
And even though we still want the validation through what we would be considered, I guess, what you consider standard research channels, and the way things and the way we have grown to understand how outcomes are measured, you can actually move much quicker and make decisions that really truly impact the now if you are able to look at data that way.
Yeah, that's what I think. And I think that there'll still be you're always going to want, like, the big medical apparatus to do the really in-depth studies. But I think that there is probably a way that we can speed all of that up. But,
Yeah.
like, what types of hypotheses can we pull out of the ether a little bit quicker and
Yeah.
chase those down?
And if nothing else, determine what to study.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. And even like on the clinical trial side, I feel like there's a lot of times where, like, in the clinical trials that we would do, and I don't know, I'm not an expert in this field at all, but my sense was there were often times where you would use a drug and there were some patients that they would respond so well to the drug, but then there were a couple adverse events and the whole study would be scrapped. Like, I saw this happen a few different times, and it's like, that's crazy that there's literally, like, there's a person out here who this drug is actually perfect for, but this drug can't get approved, and now it's going to be, down in the pipeline for however many years trying to, wade through all this mess. I think a system where everything is more connected and you're analyzing these insights in real time maybe allows you to do drug discovery, drugs, verification, like, do some of these studies much quicker, to where you're able to identify, hey, like, yeah, you as a patient definitely do not touch this drug. But
Yeah.
like, you're actually, like, you're somebody good. We can try this on you. Like, I think that there's a way to help all of medicine sort of start to move faster because we do have these real-time data streams, coming through now.
So, thinking about all of the things that are now kind of in the pipeline, and the way you're thinking about Unified as a company, if you could boil it down, what's next for you? Like, if you've got one big rock, what are you going to do next?
Well, so I could tell you the 50-year plan for Unified. I think we've taken a pretty deliberate approach this time around with Unified to run the company the way that we have always been wanting to run it, really sustainably and really profitably. And we really see Unified as it is now as kind of a base layer to a much bigger system. For me personally, we see all this data coming through to our system right now. There's a lot of companies that are out there that are basically going out and selling EHR data or selling imaging data to other companies. And then those companies take those data sets and they build algorithms, and then they sell them back to patients. It's, or there's public data sets out there that people will, use for free, and then they'll build algorithms, and then they'll go and they'll charge money to patients for that. That model to me is a little broken, a little backwards. And I really think, again, like, this is kind of the long-term, some people think this is crazy, but I think there is a world developing where patient data, personal data, is going to become, over time, more and more valuable. Since we're already seeing companies aggregate this stuff and sell it, and of course, like, the argument right now is, like, you can't really reimburse the patients because that would break patient privacy laws and all of these things. Look, I think given enough time, given another 10, 20 years, we're going to look at privacy very differently, because privacy is probably just going to look different, right?
Yeah,
like when everybody knows
That's true.
everything about everybody, our standard for privacy, I think, will be a little bit different. And I think that over time, what I would really like, what we're really trying to create is this platform where we can start helping patients monetize their data, patients and doctors monetize their actual data in a way that we can funnel that money back into their care. So, kind of the big hairy thing is like, can we actually make basic healthcare self-sustaining just using patients' own data? Like if they're donating data to the system, can that come back as a credit to their premiums and help pay for some of their healthcare? And that's really what we're really focused on, building all of that infrastructure now, and aggregating all this data so that we can start to build out this platform basically.
What an interesting concept. To be, because I think you're right in that in today's world, there's no way you would go backwards and look at how you reimburse a patient because she used your data because of privacy. But if you could build a world where there were certain aspects of that data that could be signed off on or released by a patient in exchange for
automatically, yeah,
that would be a very interesting concept.
Yeah, and then you link that up to even like getting patients hooked up to their communities. Like if you can show patients like, hey, here's what you're going through, here's all the other people that are also going through something very similar to you. Like if we can start matching communities together, how much quicker can we start aggregating data around those communities and then building solutions for them? And I think that there's a way in that model to build a cheaper version of healthcare where basic healthcare is more affordable, and then we can really start focusing on, okay, now that everybody's healthy, now how do we take all these cool insights, all this cool stuff from AI, how do we start actually figuring out how we make people better? And that's where I think, if I were to like say like my long-term goal for our industry, it's like, how do we get to the point where like basic care is not costing anybody anything, but we're charging people money when we're helping them get better, not just healthy.
That's incredible, Ben. I think this is phenomenal. And this is exactly why I wanted to sit and talk with you, because I knew we would land on something that I really hadn't given any thought to. And I think this is something that's very thought provoking, and something that it's going to resonate with a lot of people because of changes in healthcare cost and thinking about how do I get to be the healthiest me, and all of those things could be part of understanding the data that we already have. So if people are interested in learning more about Unified as a company, how do they do it? Where could they go?
You can just go to our website, unified-imaging.com. That's probably the best place. It'll probably be updated by the time this podcast comes out. We focus a lot more on the technology side than we do on the marketing side, I will say. But you can find me on LinkedIn as well if you're interested in working together. Just send me a message, and happy to work with you.
That's great. So, I'm not going to let you off the hook totally about understanding and seeing where things go. So I'm going to make sure that we stay updated on the changes in the technology, and as you have new things, and maybe we'll get you back here and we'll talk a little bit more about data and healthcare.
Yeah, that'd be great. Hopefully we're building some cool things together at My Doctor. So
that would be incredible. Thank you,
awesome.
Ben.
Thank you so much.
If you've made it this far, then I have to thank you for your time. I hope you've learned something new and enjoyed listening to the discussion as much as I enjoyed having it. I'd love to hear from you about the show, because we're working really hard to bring you great content, and the feedback really helps us get better. If you like what you've heard or watched, for those of you who are streaming out on YouTube, then take a split second to give us a thumbs up or a like. It really helps other people like you find the show too. And no one likes to miss out on the good stuff, so go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't have to wonder when or if there's a new episode. And until next time, stay remarkable.